Hello. As we come to chapter 6 of the Screwtape letters, we hear Screwtape writing to Wormwood. I'm delighted to hear that your patient's age and profession make it possible, but by no means certain, that he will be called up for military service. Screwtape explains there is nothing like suspense and anxiety for barricading a human's mind against the enemy. Again, it is that idea of suspense and anxiety. If there's one theme that I see going on in the Screwtape letters, is the real and the now versus the illusory and the future or the past, which are both, not the real. As we'll see that in a chapter a little bit later on. But again, it's that whole idea of having that suspense and anxiety, of worrying about things that might be or might not be. And so we're told what he wants men to be concerned with, what they do. Our business is to keep thinking about what will happen to them. Again, when we're with the stuff with God, we're in the present moment. We're in the now. What are we doing? Versus what's going to happen, what might happen. How much sleep has any of us lost worrying about things that might have happened, only to find out that they don't? Again, that's being in the devil's territory, is in that idea of worrying about what might be. And again, when I think about that, I think about that prayer that we have in the communion rite, where we say, "Deliver us, Lord, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our days, that by the help of your mercy we would be always free from sin and safe from all distress." If I remember correctly, in the previous translation, the word that was used there was anxiety. Again, the idea is deliver us from these things that we worry about, because really that worry is useless. Screwtape tells Wormwood, your patient will of course pick up on the notion that he must submit with patience to the enemy's will. And then he goes on to define what that would mean in the eyes of the enemy. What the enemy means in this is primarily that he should accept with patience the tribulation which has actually been dealt out to him, the present anxiety and suspense. It is about this that he has to say, thy will be done, and for the daily task of bearing this, the daily bread will be provided. Screwtape tells Wormwood, it is your business to see that the patient never thinks of the present fear as his appointed cross, but only of the things that he is afraid of. Again, when we're with God, the idea is that we're dealing with these things, these things that we have to do, and patiently accepting them. Again, we're going to find a reference a little bit up later on to this, but the idea of the cross, as I always try to tell people, is not necessarily those things that we say, well, I could avoid this if I want to. Some of those are crosses that we take on voluntarily in penance, like during this Lenten season, when we do without or do other things as a form of penance. But I always say, if you have a headache, it's not your cross to bear if you can take an aspirin and cure it, unless you choose to offer up that headache for the sake of the Lord, and then it becomes a form of penance. There was Cardinal Cook. A while back, he was the Archbishop of New York, who was dying of a very painful bone cancer. But he decided that he was going to choose not to receive pain medication for that, in order to offer up those sufferings as a form of penance. Again, that would be a cross that he would bear, but one that he bears voluntarily. There are those crosses that we can't help. The cross that comes with diminishment of age, the cross that comes with maybe some impairment, the cross that comes with a broken relationship that we just can't fix. Or, especially for parents, seeing their kids go off in a way that they did not want them and did not raise them to be, but can't control it. It is those things that we can't avoid, that when we accept those and take them up, that indeed we are bearing that cross that we are meant to have. Wormwood is warned, on the other hand, fear becomes easier to master when the patient's mind is diverted from the thing feared to fear itself. Of course, we always think of FDR with the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Wormwood is being told, do not allow the person to worry about the thing itself, but to be so caught up in the fear that he has. Again, the fear is the same thing as going back to that idea of anxiety, of being caught up in the unreal, the things that are not truly happening, but could happen. We're worrying about them happening. He says, consider as present and undesirable in his own mind. And when he regards the fear as his appointed cross, he'll inevitably think of it as a state of mind. When he starts to say, well, I guess fear is just the cross I have to bear, you start to go along with it. Wormwood is told, encourage the patient to be unconscious and concentrate on the object, but in all activities favorable to the enemy, bend his mind back on itself. The first part is when it's favorable to the devil, that we are only to think about the thing itself. We're always to think about what it is that we want to do, the sin that we want to commit. But actually, when it's working for God, the devil wants us to bend the mind back on itself, so that we're only thinking about, well, this is just a state of mind that I have. It's not really something that's all that real. I do like the idea that as we're going into this, as Screwtape is telling, is usually a sort of melodramatic or metaphysical hatred directed against imaginary scapegoats. He's talking about the idea of maybe getting the patient to think about, the Germans, the people that they're fighting in the war. He has never met these people in real life. They're lay figures modeled on what he gets from newspapers. Again, it's that whole idea of coming up with an idea based on something that we just don't know. But then, Screwtape is disappointed in talking about these human beings, that they are creatures of that miserable sort who loudly proclaim that torture is too good for their enemies, and then give tea and cigarettes to the first wounded German pilot who turns up at the back door. This is often the way that prejudice is overcome, is by getting people to actually meet one another, getting people to get to know one another. And then you realize that the prejudice is a thing in the mind, and real life is this person in front of me. Screwtape tells Wormwood, the great thing is to direct the malice he had to his immediate neighbors, who he meets every day, and to thrust his benevolence out to the remote circumference, to people he does not know. Again, trying to get you to love the person out there, but not the person close by. He says there is no good at all in flaming his hatred of Germans, if at the same time a pernicious habit of charity is growing up between him and his mother, his employer, and the man he meets on the train. Again, you could talk about the Germans as this group, this kind of idealized, or not even idealized, but kind of scapegoated group. But you compare that to the people that you actually meet each and every day. And he says we have to make sure that he starts to feel that if any love towards those other people and not towards these people, the ones that he actually encounters. He is told you must keep on shoving all the virtues outward until they're finally located in the circle of fantasy, and all the desirable qualities inward to the will. It is only insofar as they reach the will and are there embodied in habits that the virtues are really fatal to us. Again, this goes back to the idea of this kind of the teaching of Thomas Aquinas, building on Aristotle, of the idea of the intellect is how we recognize things. We recognize the things that we want. The will is what drives us to them. He said there's nothing in the will that isn't first into the intellect. If we didn't think it was good, we wouldn't seek after it. And so then the idea is always seeking the good, always following up on that, starts to develop habits. And what we call the good habits, we call virtues. They're the things that we develop over time, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. They build all the time. I like to think back to that movie a few years back, I think it was Evan Almighty, with Steve Carell as the guy who was told by God to build an ark. Of course, God was played by Morgan Freeman. He's told to build this ark, and his wife has just had enough of it, and she takes the kids and runs off. So she happens to have a waiter, who happens to be God in a restaurant, who kind of gives her a little talk and says, okay, you're asking for patience. What do you think God gives you? Patience or the ability or opportunities to be patient? It's that idea that it's in those little pieces, doing that time and time again, that we build up the habits. We go into those virtues. And as Screwtape says, it is those virtues that are really fatal to the devil and his followers. Again, if you have any questions, please send them into my email. Know that last week I didn't get that many questions, so there wasn't quite enough to put together a whole episode of questions this week, but we'll go on in the next one to chapter 7.